Medieval Europe has been portrayed in countless strategy games, but never like this. Crusader Kings 3 is the latest entry in a long-running series of genre-bending PC games. The latest entry does some of the things you would expect. The graphics are much nicer, the user interface has been improved, but Crusader Kings 3 has a clarity of vision that makes it more than the sum of its parts, and elevates it past anywhere the series has gone before. Crusader Kings 3 follows the petty King Athelstan of Wessex in the late 9th century. As we all know, history is a very complex subject matter, and such is history in Crusader Kings 3. It is a complex RPG and grand strategy game, but more than either of those things, it is a history simulation, and more than that, it is an engine for storytelling. Stories may be long or short, some are quiet and some are chaotic. But every time you take on the role of a medieval dynasty, something different happens. If you've never played a Crusader Kings, the series is actually pretty wild. It started as a fairly straightforward grand strategy game. You play as a medieval European or African or Asian monarch, or mid-level lord, and manage things like your treasury, armies, and most importantly, your titles. But as the series continued to expand, it became something akin to an RPG, unlike any other RPG you've ever played. In Crusader Kings 3, you don't play as a character, you play as a dynasty. When your character dies, you continue on as their heir, and you keep continuing on until you run out of family members. There's no predetermined win condition. You just keep on scheming and fighting and building and dealing until 1453 or your whole family dies, whichever happens first. There are ways the game tracks your score, but the game has grown to be more of a story simulator than a strategy challenge. Take one part Civilization, one part The Sims, a helping of Game of Thrones, and then remind yourself that losing can be as fun as winning, and you've got the basic recipe down. What makes CK3 such an important step forward for the series is that it knows what kind of game it wants to be from the beginning. Previous entries in the series were clearly built to emphasize the strategic elements, but expansions and DLC put the focus on the role-playing. This meant that a lot of big moments and important mechanics got buried deep in clunky menus. Not so with Crusader Kings 3. This game was designed from the ground up to be what it is. In Crusader Kings 2, you'd need to scroll through a long menu called plots to organize assassinations, the founding of new kingdoms, religious rituals, and jousting tournaments. In this new sequel, menus are much more logically organized and your most frequently used commands are much easier to find. Not only that, everything is hyperlinked like a well-run wiki, so you'll have an easy time jumping from character sheets to legal and cultural menus with pop-up boxes explaining all the terminology and gameplay mechanics. I can't say that it's not overwhelming at times, but it's much more approachable than the series has ever been. It's impossible to narrow Crusader Kings 3 down to one significant improvement. Nearly all of the game's many interacting systems are based in part on something that came in an earlier installment. But everything is tighter, better presented, easier to understand, and more fun to play. Let's look at how the new way stress is tracked as an example. In Crusader Kings 2, stress was a trait your character could obtain that worked just like lustful, generous, or one-eyed. Stress would negatively impact your stats and could evolve into the more serious depression. In Crusader Kings 3, stress is now tracked on a meter like health would be in other games. Your character's main source of stress comes from acting against their own traits. So if you send a shy character on a diplomatic mission, that will build stress. You can try and force your sadistic character to show kindness to their family, but you better have another outlet to blow off steam because that'll stress them out. By turning stress into an ever-present concern, the game makes all decisions more interesting. More than that, it forces you to roleplay in a way that Crusader Kings 2 never did. You could opt out of tough choices and play the game as more or less yourself. Now you really need to think about who the characters in the story are. Crusader Kings 3 doesn't feel like a strategy game with RPG mechanics grafted on. Nor is it entirely an RPG. Instead, you are playing something unique, a genre of game that we don't really have a word for yet. For better or for worse, Crusader Kings is one of those series with loads and loads of expansion packs. Some of these were minor, like an expanded collection of character portraits. Some of these added new mechanics like family heirlooms, and some of them completely changed the game by adding in new rules for pagan rulers. This is a new sequel, starting fresh, and as happens with many games like this, some things made it in and some things got cut. When The Sims 4 was released, many were bummed out about the loss of pools. I don't know which Crusader Kings features will be missed most by longtime fans, but I thought the choices were smart. First and most impressively, the map hasn't shrunk a lot. It stretches from Iceland in the far northwest down to Ghana in the south, over to India and Tibet in the east, and portions of Mongolia and central Russia in the northeast. Different cultural groups play as distinct from each other with unique mechanics for different pagans. Vikings are especially fun this time around, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus. Each religious, cultural group has variants, and you can further define your people through major reformations. One thing that is missing though is a lot of the wider customization options I had grown used to in Crusader Kings 2. In 3, you can't make your own ruler from scratch. You can't even give them a haircut. You also can't shatter the map, a feature I grew to really enjoy in the last game. This isn't a deal breaker, but it does change my approach to playing. Maybe this is something to be added back in the future, who can say? I am confident in asserting that CK3 feels very complete and that I eagerly anticipate seeing it expanded further. That's to say nothing of mods, which are supported from the jump, and features I haven't even considered. It's clear that Crusader Kings is not a game for everyone. It's dense, complex at times, slow at other times, and overwhelming. But there is a magic here, a storytelling generator that you won't find anywhere else. It's a series that already has a lot of fans, and I think those fans are going to agree with me when I declare Crusader Kings 3 the best Crusader Kings yet. There are also a lot of people who may become fans, and to them, I declare this game as easily the most accessible Crusader game. Not only is it a strange and wonderful experience, but it also promises to grow more exciting with future updates. You can't get your Crusader Kings fix anywhere else, and Crusader Kings 3 takes the series to new heights.